governments. And we've had a particular focus on maternal and infant health because this was such an issue for them. We've also focused on veterinary medicines, so people who have been building DIPs and, again, working with the veterinary health agencies that are already in there. We try not to replicate new structures. We try to work with existing structures in the communities so that they manage the veterinary medicines based on their needs. So this was all going well. We did it for maybe 4 or 5 years, and we were feeling happy about ourselves. People were waving at us, but they were still going off and killing wildlife because, again, why wouldn't you? You would take the benefits and still kill the wildlife and had an added benefit. At the same time, we were camera trapping for our ecological work, and we found that people were stealing the camera traps because they didn't know why they were there. So to deal with both those issues, we thought instead of us camera trapping, we will train and employ local people within each village to place the camera traps. And the more wildlife they have on village land, the more benefits they will get. So after extensive discussions with the communities, we came up with a system where every wild animal they camera trap, they get a certain number of points. So for instance, a dick will get 1,000 points, and you get more points for more threatened species or ones which cause more conflict. So baboons, which cause quite a lot of conflict, or other primates, are 1,500 points. It's every individual, so this is 2,500 points. Carnivores get more, so a spotted hyena will get 10,000 points, a lion 15,000, and the top spot is an African wild dog at 20,000. It's every individual, so this sighting of 17 wild dogs got the village 340,000 points. And this is just one small example of how it's worked ecologically, because this waterhole used to be the main hotspot for snaring in this village because it's the only place all the wildlife came to. They have now protected this waterhole. They've legally protected the camera traps because every month this waterhole is generating huge amounts of benefits for the community. Those points I can explain in more detail. I'll send you guys documents. But the way we do it is they compete in groups of 4 villages against each other. Every 3 months, we calculate the points, and they go for extra. They basically get the top village gets $2,000 worth of benefits. The next one $1,500 worth. The next 1,000. The next 500. So they all get some, and those benefits are distributed to the relevant committees, and they are spent on extra health, education, and veterinary benefits. So it doesn't replace the other benefits I've just talked about, but it adds on to them. And it's become a really important driver of local development. It was recognised recently by the regional government as now being the major driver of local development from the wildlife presence. And it's building capacity. They're building schools, they're building cattle dits. So it is enabling them to take more control over their own resources. When we talked to the warriors, obviously cultural issues were very key with the lion killing. And we talked to them extensively about how to deal with this. And we said, how, we can employ you, and we have started a warrior employment program where they're out there tracking lions, looking for them, protecting the community. So we know we can give them money. We said to them, how could we replace the status? And they said, well, to be a warrior, you have to be like the traditional warrior means to protect your community, to be strong, to be skilled, to be important. So we've worked with them on all those levels. As I said, we've employed 17 at the moment. They track lions, they protect local people, they chase lions away from household. They're seen as brave. But they said for real status, they would like to learn how to read or write because nobody knew how to do that. So we now do reading or writing with them. They are all now numerate and literate. And then we were worried about how to replace the sex. And this was clearly an issue for them. So now we have full moon dances where if there hasn't been a lion hunt in that village, we will sponsor we'll sponsor a dance where we, kill a goat and put on music, and lots of people come and celebrate the work of these lion defenders. The women come, we leave, and whatever happens, happens. But it's another way of creating celebration. And now these young men, because they've got passports, they've got training, they can use, great equipment, they've got money, so they can buy cattle. They are now seen as really important. And we're seeing the women in the community saying they want their daughters now to marry lion defenders rather than lion killers, which is quite a shift. Improving conservation awareness is key. So we show educational DVD nights about wildlife conservation. And we also take people into the park so that they can see wildlife firsthand. We found that all of these things, there was a real fear that the Barabeg in particular were not being represented. They were maybe losing some of their culture. And so we worked with them on a book. This is called Dharam, the Lion Defender. This is the first storybook that has the Barabeg depicted in it. And it's a story about a young Barabeg boy living in the project area. It explains the project to the local communities and puts them front and center of it. So it's really important for them to see themselves that this is their story and their asset. So this book has been hugely popular locally. It's in English and Swahili. We are really focused on building Tanzanian capacity.
Amy, I'm sorry, I think for some reason we've lost the presentation view. Could you kindly...
Let me try again.
present again? I think there was someone by mistake who clicked unpresent and it's
Hang on one
totally.
sec. One sec.
I could
Resume your
still see
presentation.
it.
Okay, let me try again. I'm resuming again.
Yeah, it's working now. Thank you, Amy.
It's back. Thank
Is it back?
you.
Are we on the Lion Defender slide?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
we
cool.
are.
Cool. So building Tanzanian capacity is a big issue for us. The team has gone from 3 of us to over 70 people, 95% of whom are local Tanzanian. And it's been having real impact in the core area. Carnivore attacks are reduced by over 60%, and carnivore killing is reduced by over 80%. And what's really changed, probably most importantly for us, that whereas people used to run away from us, we are now seen as a much more valuable part of the local community, where people come to us with issues, everything from forced child marriage to all sorts of things that are beyond our remit, but we are seen as people who can help, just help them deal with some of these issues. There's much more that needs to be done. We need to scale up our work in the Ruaha landscape and beyond it. There are so many places where we need much more urgent conservation action. So for an example, we are now developing a new project in the Sulu landscape. We were meant to be there right now, and we would have been if it wasn't for coronavirus. But this is going to be seeing how many of those issues in Ruaha or how many of the solutions could be replicated elsewhere. But we can't do it one site by one site. We need to work together and to have partners and partnerships if we are going to amplify our impact. So 6 of us who are all working on lion conservation projects across Africa, we're getting frustrated with the lack of shared thinking and shared expertise. So we joined forces to create something called the Pride Lion Conservation Alliance, where we share all our expertise, our failures, our successes, our models, everything, all our data, just so that we can get a head start on sort of seeing which of these solutions work at broader scales. We are also focused very much on empowering local leaders in conservation, particularly women. This is meant to say particularly women. That logo apparently is the international symbol for lesbians. I only just discovered. This isn't just about lesbians, although they're welcome. This is about, we focus though particularly on women because we really think women are underrepresented in conservation and we need to get that better. We just in February had the first training of 30 amazing African conservation women. And we are now continuing that training with them. And we had over 500 applicants for that course. So there's a clear need for this so that we can build the capacity and share all of our expertise. And we learned as much from them as they certainly learned from us. And the partners' principles, when I looked at this, I mean, it's so relevant to everything we have done through our work. Engagement with local stakeholders is absolutely crucial, but it has to be done well. Lots of people talk about it, and we certainly haven't done it brilliantly at many of the times, but you sort of learn over time. And I think the presence for us is absolutely key. We lived for 2 years in those villages and no one talked to us. And I think that was building a relationship and building the trust that we weren't just there for a field season. We weren't just there to get our own data. We were committed to understanding the problem and to being there. And similarly now with the lion defenders, they are in the community. We have conflict officers who are from within the villages. They are all living there, so they can give us that early warning of issues that are happening. They can put the issues in context. So we are building the relationship and the trust at that scale. The aptness, I mean, it's really important, I think, to hear, obviously, from the people living with the wildlife, what the problems are. I went in there feeling it was going to all be about depredation, and it really wasn't. Depredation is a very minor issue here. I mean, it is an issue in terms of the fact that attacks happen and they're a problem for people, but the conflict was far, far more about people's cultural values ascribed to killing lions. It was about them being seen as brave, the whole loss of identity of the Barabeg tribe. There were many, many things going on there that I would never have known if we hadn't spent a long time listening and learning from the people. So the science, absolutely has an element there. We monitor everything that we do. We collect data. We publish papers. But it's much more about understanding the threats from those people and what their perceptions are, not what our perceptions are. The respect, we have really worked very hard to try to build a respectful partnership with the Barabeg. Everyone, their local name is Mangati, which means the enemy, and they are certainly alert to the fact they're often viewed as marginalized and sort of people that shouldn't be liked or respected or trusted. So it's taken a long time to build up that with them. And just simple things like really working hard to make a really nice book that has them at the heart of it and going to and from them, that they work with us on it. It just shows that we value their thoughts. And I think that's absolutely critical. Probably one of the most critical things is respect to your partners and realizing that not everyone wants to be with you. We've had discord between the warriors sometimes and the elders in the community, and that needs to have us stand back and let them deal with this. And when they say how they want to work with us going forward, we just respect and we respond to that, because their decisions have to come first. We try to be as transparent as possible with what we do. You know, we are a conservation organisation. We've had to make some tough choices sometimes about how much of our effort we can put into things like transporting people to clinics, because there is an endless need for things like ambulances, healthcare. So we have to be very, very clear. And now we write down exactly what we can commit to in a year, and we make sure that we stick to that. But also we say, if it's not written down, we haven't promised anything. So otherwise there can be real issues with people thinking you've promised stuff, and then they blame you for it not being delivered. And yet that was just poor communication, that they felt we were going to do more than we ever felt we were going to do. So there has to be really clear transparency, and there are really challenging ethical issues here about which activities we should get involved with, which ones we can't afford to, and balancing the needs and the transparency of the donors and the local partners as well. So we could talk about that for hours, but that's a really challenging area. I think negotiation is key, as we talked about with the patients, you know, to spend the years there waiting for them to action as soon as we saw those lions killed, and going to call the authorities. And that was partly learning from other people. If they hadn't said that, I was sorely tempted to go a totally different route of enforcement rather than partnership, and that would have been very different. So we've now worked out solutions with them, things like the Lion Defenders Programme. We responded to things like the BOMA, the livestock enclosures, the need to move those, and the need to engage the farmers with the canvas BOMA. So all these things need to be adaptive over time. And I think empathy is absolutely central. I mean, I'm always shocked that on Facebook, for instance, I struggle with social media. If I put on something about a local person killing a lion, the amount of hatred we get for local people is terrifying. And I think there's a huge lack of empathy and understanding for what it means to live in those rural communities. And we need to build that global empathy for these people, not just the wildlife, but the people who live alongside them. And I think not judging people and recognizing their needs is really core to certainly what we've tried to do. And I think it needs to be much more central to conservation as well. Responsiveness, certainly seeing problems as opportunities. When we had the camera trap theft and we had people not recognizing that the wildlife delivered the benefits, that's when we ended up coming up with the community camera trapping and making sure the interventions were linked, in that case, to biodiversity, but also recognizing that in some cases, the healthcare needs, we do provide an ambulance service in some cases, because those are other things that we feel we have to do just to be responsive to the needs of the community. Strategic support, there isn't that much sort of regional government presence down here, but we work extensively with the local government partnerships. We try to make sure that wherever possible, we work with existing entities. And so, for instance, there's livestock officers that originally we didn't know about. And so we caused some problems by starting something and not looping them in. But it's trying to understand and really drill down to the local level of strategic support that does exist in those communities and working with it rather than being seen as competitive to it. So it's something we have had to really sort of learn on the ground, but it's something we are very keen to make sure that we are seen as a supportive partner, not somebody who replaces it and tries to dominate. So it really, I think this partners principles is great. I'm really keen on it. I'm going to share it much more widely, and it has been something that I really think needs to be considered in conservation going forward, because community conservation does require partnership at all levels. It requires that consideration in the graph that we've just seen, and it requires that partnership on the ground with the local communities to build that trust informed by those kinds of strategies, and partnership between different organizations. Things like, you know, you guys working on snow leopards with us in lions, we can learn so much from each other. And we've seen that certainly from across lion conservation and beyond. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amy. So I just wanted to note that we started the recording. I'm sorry we didn't start from the beginning, Amy, so we missed half of it because some people were coming in and out. But if we will be recording, and if anyone is uncomfortable with that, message me later, and you can let me know if you don't want to be recorded, especially this question and answer period. But yeah, go ahead. If anyone has questions, I think you can just unmute your mic and then go ahead and ask Amy some questions.
Justine, there are some chat questions coming in and other questions. So how do you want to moderate it? Do you want to choose it, or should I just respond to the chat questions coming in?
I think, yeah, respond to the chat questions coming in. We were expecting many more questions during the talk, but since there hasn't been many, I think you can just start putting them in.
So I don't know if everyone can see the chat question. This is a question saying that the community was initially unwilling to engage, and in the situation, how do we manage to gain entry and spend the first 2 years? They must have been testing times. So to answer that one, yes, it was very challenging. I mean, we agreed with the local village that we could set up a camp there, which is literally just 3 small tents under a tree. And we just lived there for 2 years, and we had happily at that time relatively little expenditure and just a few donors. So we were talking to them about the need to start this understanding, and it was more testing really in terms of dealing with donor expectations when they kept saying, what changes have you made this year? And we're like, nothing, no one's talked to us. So that was difficult to manage that. But even at that time, we recognized it was so crucial that you don't build a relationship in a year. You know, you don't build it really even in 10 years, which is how far we've been there so far. That is a drop in the ocean. So we have to be there long term. And it was only when we engaged with them after they came and started charging their phones and started being at camp and recognizing that we were people that at least weren't as scary as they thought we were. So it was breaking down some of the misconceptions that they had about us as well that had built up over the first 2 years. They were very challenging times, but yeah, I think we needed to go through them to build that trust. And the second question was, has the local government played a role in facilitating the work and helping it scale? Do they see us as an agency doing their work? So this has been interesting, and it changes over time depending on the pressures of the local government. So yes, the local government at the village level has very much facilitated what we've done, and we've seen real desire from other local sort of the village executive officers and people to go to other villages. At the slightly higher level, it's very complicated. It depends who's in position at that time. Sometimes there's fears about what we do, what's our real agenda, how much we're profiting from it, all these sorts of fears. And then also there's a concern that the more we put into the community, the less the less they do. So they see us as just saying, if you're putting in the healthcare stuff, we don't need to. And that's the exact opposite of what we want. We want this to be additive, not replacing it. So we've had to have these lots of ongoing discussions with the government about the fact that they still need to maintain a presence there and we can add to it. So yeah, that was the answer to those two. Okay, there's another question. We have dealt with issues that you might not directly link with conservation, such as getting girls educated. So whether we have any guidance to go by to take those decisions, because people often struggle with making similar decisions. Yeah, and this is something that I struggle with a lot. I mean, where should we put our efforts? How much is mission creep and how much is that acceptable? That, you know, we go in there as a conservation organisation and now we're dealing with healthcare and education. For a start, we don't have the knowledge to do that a lot of the time. So we have to work through partnerships, but we still want the linkage back to conservation. So it's a constant balancing act. And I think at the moment we've got our guidance on the ground from, you know, the educational committee in the villages, the head teachers, and we get it then from the district commissioner, people like that. So we try to look at what the existing structures are and then see the real needs. Things like the porridge project, there was an obvious need for something that wasn't happening. And when we talked to all those different levels, there was support for it to happen. So then we had that happen. But things like the education for girls, that was just something that we ended up pushing back. We knew that there was the ability to, you know, fund for people to go through secondary school, but there wasn't the cultural desire for girls to go. So we just found a few families where they did want to send their girls. We enabled those to go. And then we've seen a knock-on effect where people are starting to recognise that girls have more role there. But it's a real, I can't really give you clear principles and say there's A, B, and C. It's literally just that learning as you go. Okay, the more questions. Can you give a sense of the impact of your work on wildlife beyond the lions and carnivores, for instance, the herbivores? So, okay, so with that, the camera trapping work that we've done has been the most important for that, because the prey species also get points. So you'll get points for elephants and dictys and duikers and impalas and everything. And often, actually, when you look at the points that a village accrues, it's often more generated by prey presence than it is by carnivores, because you don't tend to see the carnivores that often. So that provides a real incentive for people maintaining wild prey there, and that's been key for us. And we've certainly seen, I don't know, I would hesitate to say a trend because it's not done in a statistically robust enough way for us to really look at occupancy over time. It's something we may be able to do that later. We are certainly seeing that there is maintenance of good wild prey species on the village land. And with things like that waterhole that I talked about, where you had previously a lot of snaring in the area, now that's protected, and people have come to us and said, how do we increase our number of points? Is it that we protect this area of land? Is it that we stop that guy snaring? What do we do? And we say, that's nothing to do with us. You know the threats in your village, you decide what to do, and then you're likely to get more points if it's, you know, if it's effective. So they go back and they deal with that. So I certainly think we've seen more tolerance for that. Any comments on how the role of hardcore protected areas are for conservation versus more integrated landscape? So I think we need both. I mean, Ruaha is the second biggest national park in East Africa now, and I think we have to have that core protected area at the heart of it. Often the real difficult area is this border area, which is where most of our work is, because you're seeing a very hard border in many cases, and then that can have real impacts even on the wildlife within the formally protected area. So I do think we need to have a much softer edged approach wherever possible, making sure that it's not seen as too exclusive. just wildlife in that one area, because otherwise on village land people say, well, that wildlife has got that area, this is just human area, we can't have wildlife here. And given how we need much more space for wildlife, not only lions but many other species, I think we have to make sure that we just soften the view and make it more integrative. Okay, so we mentioned that the villages compete for points. Does that create friction between them? Other advantages? What are the advantages of a competitive model over a cooperative one? Yes, so this has been fascinating to watch the dynamics of it. So the way that it works is that we have groups of 4 villages. At the moment, we have 16 villages. We try to group them in groups where the villages have fairly similar characteristics in terms of distance from the protected area, extent of, the size of the area in their land, etc. So we have absolutely seen competition. And so we've seen, for instance, things like they used to put their camera traps often on a river because that's where wildlife comes to drink. And the rivers were often the border of the border between the 2 villages. So then we have these arguments. So people would say, well, you're pointing your camera trap onto our village land. So that impala you've counted is our impala, not your impala. So we need the points, not you. So we had all these fights about it. So now we've agreed with everyone that you can't put your cameras within a kilometre of village boundaries, just to make sure you are capturing your own village's wildlife. Then it threw up an issue that people didn't know where the village boundaries were. And this was another interesting thing that we assumed everyone knew, but then we had to work with them to map out the village boundaries, and everyone had to agree, and that's now uploaded on the GPSs. So it's been all these things that you discover, then create another problem. But the competitive model for me is very useful because people love a competition. And I think if you did it in a cooperative way and said, look, we're going to give the whole, all 24 villages, we're going to calculate the points and spread it out equally, you would be back to almost the same issues we had with the national park benefits. So people say, but we are having more of the cost, we have more wildlife, and you've got these people free riding who they've, cleared all of their habitat and they're still getting our points. So I think personally the way that we've done it with the communities is the most adaptive there. It may not work everywhere. There may be an argument for a different level of cooperation, maybe all 4 villages, groups of villages against each other, but certainly the competition people actually like that competitive element. Okay, so a question about how our team empathise and negotiate with the community with such strong cultural values of killing lions. So how we did it, this was just really a lot of discussing with them and trying to understand that we were not there just as advocates for lions. We understand that they killed them, and why do they kill them? That's the really critical reason. A lot of people didn't actually want to go on the lion hunts because it is scary, and it is, you can get your arm ripped off, you can get killed, there's some pressure to go. So it was really unpicking about why is it that lion killing has had value here. And when they explained that the role of the warrior had seemed to diminish, and this was the only way they could really be good warriors again, it was much more about that central identity of being a warrior than it was about actually the killing of the lions. And it came at a fairly good time because these sorts of cultural killings are actually illegal, but obviously there wasn't much enforcement of it, so they were very wary of doing it too much necessarily. But there was a need for a new model there, and I think people were receptive to the idea of how can they get it in a way that they didn't feel then they were risking being attacked by police or anyone else, and they could still get the benefits of wealth and cattle and status and things. And it hasn't been a perfect replication. There are still young men who want to go and kill lions, but all we're trying to do is to reduce it to a level where it's a sustainable amount, really. If the odd lion gets killed, that's manageable in a landscape like this, but not if the huge extensive lion killing that was happening. Okay, regarding the dogs that we introduced in field sites in India, they pose a threat to snow leopards and are known to breed with wolves. Interesting. Is that not a problem with the introduction of a non-native species into the ecosystem? So in terms of the threat to carnivores, we have had one instance where they went after lions. We found the 2 lions pinned down in a bush by a dog. We've only introduced 10. So this was a very introductory trial, so we haven't done it at a large scale. We've certainly seen they can chase them off. They haven't killed any lions or anything. I know in Namibia, where we used to work, they occasionally killed leopards, and we've certainly seen in Namibia that guarding dogs can be a threat to jackals, they can be a threat to leopards, they can be a threat to other carnivores, and certainly prey if they're used as hunting dogs. These dogs in particular were really picked as not good hunting dogs because that's not the point, and they're fairly lazy as they go. So they don't have much of the drive. The local people use their own dogs for hunting. And so these dogs, I think, are a much less a threat to wildlife than the normal dogs that people have around. In terms of breeding with carnivores there, we neuter all the dogs that we place. So partly so that people can't breed them and sort of start selling them themselves. And we just wanted to contain that pilot study. And so we haven't had that to be an issue. And I would be interested, to hear more. It sounds an interesting challenge that I haven't heard of. Let me see if there are more that I've ignored or not. So how do we balance the expectations from the community with long-term financial, no, hang on one second. How challenging it's to involve everyone in the community, and do we still see people who disagree and continue to kill? Yes, absolutely. It's definitely a challenge, and this is one where the community themselves has to decide how much they want to do it. And as soon as the community starts to see benefits, wider benefits, and particularly with the community camera trapping, we found this was where the whole community started to get together and say, actually, we would like more investment in our healthcare and our education. And to do that, if we need more wildlife, then you know, Guy B over there, you're going off and killing these animals for your own personal gain, but it's costing the whole community. So they were starting to have these discussions. And there was one quite striking example where the young warriors went out about 2 years ago into the park and went to kill lions. And the villagers pulled them back in again. The women in particular stood up and they said, no, we're not having that. They got the guys back in from the field, which we could never have done. And they said to them, you are killing the very thing that is enabling us to give birth safely and to educate our children. And we are not having that. So the women in the village, we are not having you, but you'll need to be a good guy, sort of a warrior above that. And so they put a community-wide ban in that village on all lion and elephant hunting. And that was huge. And that was something that caused a massive fracture at that moment in the community, because the young warriors wanted to kill, but the elders just said no. And we sort of stood back. This was nothing to do with us. We were never engaged in it. We heard about it afterwards. And the elders said, if you want to kill, you don't get to live in this village. And so they expelled, I think, 3 of the warriors. They went off for between like 6 and 12 months. And then each of them came back eventually and agreed not to kill in that village, at least. There's always a risk they could go to another village and kill. Then you've got, you're looking at the enforcement, how able each village is to police what's happening on their land. But certainly there are always different factions in a community, and you need to have the whole community buy in to put those general community expectations. You always have people who go against them, and that's up to the community to police, really. A quick question, okay, about how we balance the expectations from the community with long-term financial viability. Always a massive challenge. We get this question on every grant application. What is the sustainability of the program? How is it going to go, after the life of the project? And my answer now, which I write in tiny font, is it's not. I truly believe that these people are bearing such extensive costs of living with wildlife that we as the international community have to step up and pay at least the economic costs of trying to rebalance that equation. And if we're not willing to do it, these animals will generally go, because people have far more urgent needs than conservation. They are worried about food security and health and education. And if these animals are a net cost, they will disappear. So the only way that it's going to be sustainable in the short term, I would say in the next 10 to 20 years, is continued external support. We can look at new models and carbon credits and all sorts of other things that we're looking at. But again, you're looking at balancing that international, richer sort of investment with the local investment, which is putting up with the presence of these animals and putting up the area of land for wildlife. So they are making investment, they are making their commitment. We need to equal that commitment, or I don't think it will be sustainable. So if we're not willing to do it, I think it will fall apart. And everyone sides of it and then usually gives the money. Okay, so how do we see it scaling up? The long-term investment in presence is key, but obviously a hindrance to scaling with limited resources. So to deal with that one, yes, I think presence is key, and I think there's no shortcut to this. I think we need proper presence in these key landscapes. What we can do is try to identify priority landscapes and species in areas where it really overlaps for hotspots that we need that presence. It's something we're looking at for now in West and Central Africa. And then there are plenty of people. I think there is human resource there. The financial resource needs to be there and needs to be scaled. And this is something we are pressing lots of donors to do. And I think we can grow the pot. I'm quite hopeful that we can grow the funds needed for targeted presence. And it can't just be short-termism. It has to be embedded local people, community stuff. So I think we have to just grow the resources. And I am fairly hopeful that we can do that. How do we see the need for conservationists in this or any landscape? Should the long-term goal be one without our interventions? It seems hard to leave given the importance and power we get from the communities. So the need for conservationists in the landscape. So again, it's slightly back to the sustainability question. I would love to see it where some sort of wonderful place where just people are living in harmony with the wildlife and deciding not to kill lions and elephants, but there has to be a reason for them not to do that. So they have to get value from those lions and elephants somehow. And how to do that and how to make it not reliant on an external market in any way, whether it's tourists or trophy hunters or donors, is very challenging. So I would love to see that kind of model, but I think it's really hard to do. You could do it through things like game meat harvesting, things like that. That will only work in certain contexts and needs to be well regulated. So I would love to, I don't have the answer to your question. I would like to see it as that we don't need to be there long term, but I think in the next, certainly we don't have the other solutions right now. I think in the short term, 10 to 15 years, we're certainly going to need to be there and work with those communities and what other alternatives could look like. And I'd love to hear from some of you guys on it. Okay, so I understand that most of the prior killings were retaliatory. Did the natives happen to kill lions for any other reasons, for instance, poaching? Do foreigners or other non-natives happen to frequent the same area for poaching, and how does that feature in the action plan? So most of them are, well, it's complicated. It's a mixed motivation for killing. Yes, it's to do with retaliation, but actually young men often go out and hunt with the slightest whisper of there being a lion around just because they want, you know, the body parts, the prestige. So a lot of it is actually cultural rather than retaliatory. Those two are quite closely linked together. And I always steer away from the word poaching because it's so laden in terms of who is a poacher. A poacher is someone who illegally kills wildlife, and you are allowed to kill wildlife to protect yourself or your livestock. So there's often a rationale there for doing it. People do go out and snare bushmeat for subsistence protein, and sometimes lions and other carnivores and many other wildlife obviously get killed that way. So that's certainly a threat that's happening. And whether it's foreigners going in, so there are foreigners in some parts of the area for trophy hunting. That's not really an issue in this area of village land. That's more to the north of the park. So that's not really a dynamic that's an issue here. I'm trying to think of other, there's been a slight, you know, we've seen Congolese gangs come over and look for ivory and things like that. A very small amount of that sort of external influence here, but at the moment it's fairly, because it's quite a remote area and cut off, it tends to be very local use. There is some local trade use for lion fat, for instance, around the heart. People kill lions for that, but often it's that people fear the lions and the young men want to go out and get the prestige, and then they sell some body parts. So it all tends to be tied in together. So I'm just getting through these because I'm aware we've only got 5 minutes. So depredations are a huge issue. They were killing. Okay, so what was the effective social strategy we used or monetary benefit we provided to bring some changes in perception for gaining social values for carnivore killings instantly? So yes, in terms of changing the social and cultural norms, I mean, people always say this, it's really hard to change culture. And in my experience, which is just mine, it's very easy for cultures to change. They change all the time. Look at us with mobile phone use. Our cultures have changed, you know, unbelievably since I was growing up, because of the things that make it easier and better for us. So I think if you find the right triggers in a place that people want to use, then cultures will and do change. They're changing already. But in terms of the cultural norms about killing lions, it was more about sitting down with them. We borrowed from extensively, and we had lion guardians from Kenya, this lion guardians model, come down and work with us, where they have done this warrior engagement program, where to become a warrior now is, you can do it more easily through conservation than you can through lion killing. One of the big things was that with the killing, only one of the warriors tends to benefit, whereas something like the warrior engagement program, where we employ multiple warriors to protect the wildlife, to get employment, to get training, to get literacy, they all benefit. So that's been a really key element of changing that cultural norm. And also then simultaneously working with the women in particular, the women, because they started to see benefits come from the wildlife, they stopped rewarding the young men as much for killing the lion. So those two sort of things of giving benefits in other ways, and the community stopping doing the rewards as much for the existing lion killing was a bit of a joint pressure on them. I'm not sure if that explains it. Have we considered ecotourism was similar to generate money? Not really, because Ruaha, as I mentioned, is the second biggest national park, and it does not make money. The vast majority of parks in Africa already don't make money from tourism. I mean, it has about 20,000 tourists a year. I think, God, we just did an analysis on it and I've forgotten, but it's something like 70 to 90% of protected areas in Africa rely extensively on donor money to keep them afloat. You know, so Tanzania has 25 national parks, 4 of them make money. And so those 4 are propping up all the others. So for us to add an ecotourism element to us is almost guaranteed to fail, because frankly, when we've tried to get any kind of buy-in with local lodges, people don't want to come and be in an area with like just no running water, no sanitation, lots of flies. They want the gin and the white tablecloths and the fancy 4x4s. That's what they want in a tourist experience, most of them. There are sort of a few who would do a lower amount, you know, you get sort of the backpackers who want to come, but it's a very limited side. So I don't think it would be wide scale enough to see real benefits. And also it's very externally dependent then, even more so I think than donor funding. How does the government look at the initiative? Are they platonic, engaged actively and share it, or do they see a conflict or cooperation with their roles? I touched on this a little bit earlier, but totally varies, depends on who you talk to in the government. Everyone has different egos, and perspectives and things to get or risk through this. So at the village level for government, people are very cooperative because they genuinely see that it is better for them, and they are playing such a key role in it. Every time we do a celebration, for instance, giving out the community camera trap benefits every 3 months, we get a higher up government level person to come and distribute the benefits. So they get the accolade. Wherever possible, we provide information, we give them the stuff to work with, and we will do things behind the scene and then enable them to take the credit for it. So we really, really try to make sure it's not seen as us doing it for our prestige or anything like that. It's trying to make sure that they also, we have to understand their points of view, much like the local community. What do they need to get out of it? And how can we enable them to be seen as doing better work with the help of the project rather than competition? It doesn't always work. There's been conspiracy theories and a million other issues, but you've got to look at them as key partners as well, and try to make sure they feel engaged and are not hostile to what we do. I think that was the end of it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're great in time. We got a minute left. That was great, and it's fabulous that everyone was able to answer any questions. But if there's anything, I don't know if you maybe have questions for us, and maybe if part of the team would like to answer and give you a thing in a minute. If you have a minute time, feel free.
Yeah, well, I would just love to see from, obviously I know some of what you guys do, but from you seeing this, what do you think of the things that either most resonate with what you do or are the most different from your perspective? And I guess, do you see anything that either you could use for you or that we could use from your experience?
So maybe Ajay, you can, Ajay is also with us here, and he can maybe share a little bit of his thoughts.
Hi, Amy. This is Ajay. I work in India, part of the program, the Snow Leopard Trust program in India. I'll just point to two things. I think one point that overlaps with what you said, the fact that presence is extremely important, and the fact that there's no shortcut to that. It takes as much time as it takes. That's something that completely resonates with what we also have experienced. And I think one point, several points to take away, but one point that you specifically made about cultural norms and it not necessarily being very difficult to change those cultural norms was, I thought, very, very interesting, because we sometimes burden ourselves with the belief that cultural norms have stayed on for so long. And the cell phone example was such a wonderful one to see that, yes, these communities are dynamic and not stuck in time, and that therein lies an opportunity for us to engage and find middle ground.
No, great. I totally agree. I think often people just say, if they realize you're dealing with cultural issues, they often say, that's it, we just can't deal, that everyone stops because it's beyond our remit, it feels scary, it feels there's this accepted wisdom that you can't change it. But I totally agree. I think things are much more dynamic, and people everywhere are very changeable and resilient and adaptable. So I think we can use that in conservation as well.
Yeah. And maybe Kuban, do you have some thoughts you want to share from a Kyrgyzstan perspective for Amy?
Definitely not, he says.
Okay, Kuban. Yeah, I don't have to put you in the spot. If there's anyone else, maybe Bayer in Mongolia, if you have any thoughts you want to share with Amy from Mongolia perspective. Or anyone else, feel free.
Yeah, there is no pressure, but yeah, it's always good to learn from other people.
Hi, sorry. So I just two things that popped up for me, which I really I'm going to need to think about. The first one, I really liked, that you have to deal with lots of issues that are beyond your remit. And I think this is something that's come up a lot with the people working in the Snow Leopard Trust, and obviously transparency is a key aspect of that, as is empathy and responsiveness. But I really like what you seem to be indicating is that you now have like a set of sort of rules or something in terms of what you will and what you won't engage with. And I think actually that might be something that the Snow Leopard Trust might want to think about more broadly in each country context, to think about whether that would actually help in terms of the sort of decision making on issues beyond the direct remit of the Snow Leopard Trust. And the second issue that kept popping up, but I think is really key, is the role of women and girls in conservation. And I thought it was really interesting, this, the issue of the scholarship, and the fact that it's becoming cross-generational now, really, with also the example that you had of the women who really stopped those young men from going out into the national park and killing lions. And so I think, again, maybe that's something, because the Snow Leopard Trust has a program of crafts that mainly women engage in, and that is a key aspect of the Snow Leopard Trust. But maybe there could be things to do beyond that to support and really engage women specifically in conservation.
Definitely. I think one of the challenges we've found is that you sort of want it both ways. You want to deliver the benefits that everyone wants from conservation, but equally, our remit is so narrow, and I know how complicated just conservation is, let alone how complicated healthcare is, or sanitation, or education. So for me to start to do that sort of stuff too much, I can see throws up all sorts of ethical issues. And so obviously forming partnerships is good. However, once you form the partnerships and you bring in, I don't know, a healthcare organization to do that, then how do you maintain that link that the conservation program has enabled that? And it sounds so selfish to want that, but obviously we all do still want to use conservation as a leverage. And I was worried, I remember thinking, when we had these very big grants coming in, World Bank and others, thinking that the amount of leverage that we can have through direct conservation suddenly goes out of the window, because it's just so small. And yet the presence there and the long-term relationships and really understanding the needs of the community, that we can deliver that. So I think that balance, we've had endless issues locally and just head racking about how we need to, all these needs that people come to us and say, we need this, we need that, we need that. So now, as I mentioned, we do write it down. If someone comes and says, can you take the school children to the football matches? And we're like, no, we can't, sorry, because our fuel needs to be used for these reasons. We say to them with the healthcare, the ambulance was a constant issue. But then we had a garage at camp, so we said, right, we will agree, and we wrote it in a letter that you can bring the ambulance to our camp twice a year. We'll do a full service. We'll do up to this amount of repairs. We put the amount of money there. That's what we will do for keeping the ambulance going. The ambulance actually is a local and regional responsibility, so they need to also put something in to match it. But it's so frustrating when it's not happening, because then you have people there who are, having terrible childbirths and struggling, and people are going to die if you don't help. And it's an endless challenge there, I think. Yeah. And I think one of the things we're just thinking about is, again, back to your point about women, is how do we, rather than constantly reacting to these situations, so how do we deal with the structures underpinning that? We've talked about something like a walk-in clinic, where we train local midwives in partnership with obviously a group that understands that, and we have those women walk around and talk to women who are in pregnancy and check those pregnancies, how they're going, provide the sort of healthcare that you might not in any way that you would get in the Western world, but still the regular sort of checks and things like that, so we can identify women as they're coming up towards labour, the sorts of women who are showing high risk issues, blood pressure and things like that. And then we wanted to think of a first responder app. There's something called Beacon, which we've looked at using. I don't know if you guys know it, but it's an emergency responder app, and you train people up locally, you give them a smartphone, you build the capacity within the community. We've looked at getting motorbike ambulances or something, so we build the network for them, and then they manage it so that they respond to each other and getting people to the clinics, and it becomes something that and starts off that they take the ownership for. So yeah, it's constantly evolving.
So I just wanted to jump in and just say a couple of things. So thanks Amy, thanks so much for this amazing talk. It really resonated a lot with some of the work we do. So I work in India as well. I just wanted to just share a thought where I was thinking about, when you talked about how, the warriors did kill, the 4 or 6 lions even after the engagement, and I thought that resonates a lot, because sometimes what happens back in our landscapes as well, that snow leopards do get killed, even after engagement, and then that's a reality, right? Because it's so nuanced. It's not just that people want to kill them, and I think that's important, because that got me to think how it's important to communicate certain things and all these nuances to, let's say, funding organizations and donors and so on and so forth, and how, to a certain level, not massively, we need to potentially think about defining conservation success. For instance, I don't know how many funding organizations would be happy when we say, okay, we've maintained a presence and understood cultural nuances in a landscape for the past 4 years. They'll be like, no, but how many lions were killed then? I mean, which is understandable. But at a certain level, I think that shift needs to come. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit, but like I feel like as a community, if I may call us one, the carnivore conservation or whatever it is that we can call ourselves, I think we need to push a little bit for that. And not say that would be done, and we'll accept killings of wildlife or whatever. But like, I hope I'm making myself clear where I think we need to sort of come together towards that. Yeah.
No, I think you're totally right. I think it's absolutely something we need to do. And we need as much donor engagement and fundraiser engagement as we do local community engagement. And often people think their way is the obvious way. And we have proper, I wouldn't say fights necessarily, but animated discussions with some of our donors who want completely unrealistic things. They want to see that we've had a conservation impact in terms of changing the population level of the number of lions in the area. That's not going to happen in terms of, if we can just reduce this massive level of killing, we will have done something to hold the line until we come up with wider scale solutions. And I think we need to be much better, as you say, as a community, to have each other's backs, to not oversell what any of us can do, and be very frank about the challenges of this. And I find it only ever comes with personal relationships, just like it does on the presence on the ground. But when you sit with those donors, you give them talks, you are very upfront about all those challenges. You say to them, you can't ask me that we go down to 0 killings. It's never going to happen. Or what we want to do, and our aim is reducing the conservation threat. And so that will happen by getting the number of killings down to whatever, it doesn't have to be a specific number, it depends on the area. But if we have less than 5 lions killed in our area, that's fine. And it shouldn't be that we are then castigated, which happens a lot on social media in particular, when there's an attack then, because people seem to think it's so unacceptable now to kill any carnivore. It's not the case in terms of conservation. In terms of conservation, you need to reduce the killing down to a sustainable level. You can't expect people to live with things. If there's a man-eating lion or something like that, a lion that's really threatening their livelihoods, it's just, we need to be respectful of what any one of us would do in that situation. I think we need to engage with donors much more comprehensively. And I totally agree with you, to get them, if we lay out what we can do and they buy into that, sometimes they get disappointed that we haven't done more. And I agree with you. People often look for the shiny new thing. They want to know what you're doing next. Where are you expanding to? And it's hard to say to them, we are just doing the same thing we did last year and the same thing we did the year before, because that's working. Or it's working as well as we can expect it to work right now. And it's difficult, but I think if we are all saying that together and being realistic, then that's much better, even if we lost some funders that way, much better than later on being in a position where you can't deliver on what you've said, where we feel we're letting everyone down. And I think the risk there is greater.
Yeah, and I think, Amy, just like you were saying just there, that's very much the philosophy of the Snow Leopard Trust and all the range countries, is committing, and there's no maybe exit strategy. We really do to our locations in Mongolia over 20 years, some areas, and the TOST has been set up for over 10 years, and the same with all the other countries. And we do have that same philosophy. So I think that really resonates with the teams, probably. We're there for the long run. There's no...
Definitely. We're there for the long run, and I think we need funders who are there for the long run. And not every funder can be there for 10 or 20 years. But I think if you build a good relationship where you are honest with them, people respect honesty, and you are honest about all the challenges and all the issues and how much you can do and what you can't do, people like that sort of integrity, I think. And then you find we've had amazing partners who, many of our partners, the ones we had like $2,000 grants within year 1 are still with us today, often with much bigger grants now. So it's really important, that relationship building. And I worry that it's boring for them to say the same stuff over and over again. But you keep them engaged, you make them part of it, you tell them different stories in different ways. But yeah, you never oversell it. I think in that way, all sorts of craziness lies.
Yeah. So I think we've already stolen extra time from Amy, but thank you so much. This was really a really fascinating talk. And I think our teams from all over the range, we've had teams from over 5 countries here. today listening to you, Amy. So we're very thankful. And yeah, so if we have more questions, maybe everyone can email me and Juliet and Ajay can then look through and then maybe get in touch with Amy in the future. But yeah, if you have other ideas, Amy, to stay in touch in the future, please don't hesitate to keep in touch with our team. And we are going to have our second webinar in 2 weeks. So we're going to try to have this every 2 weeks in the next coming period. So again, if anyone has ideas of other guests to invite or other things they would like to talk about, just get in touch. And again, thank you, Amy. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. I might want to listen to your next one, so I'd be interested to hear different perspectives and learn from you guys. So thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you're definitely invited.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. I don't know how we leave this now. Yep, someone's left it.